And finally, for week 2, a presentation about some big concepts before we do a little theoretical stuff before we get back to pages, and next week when we'll jump heavily into markup. So big concepts. This relates to my versions of information from a recent chapter that you read, chapter 3. What is the web? Well, this is what the web used to be, desktop computers, right? Now these days, this is what the web is. It's so much. It's tablets. It's phones. It's different size laptop to desktop to TVs to so much. And what's it going to be in the future? Everything is going to have a browser, probably. Your refrigerator already might, and your car certainly already might, and so on. So this idea that the web has split into so many different things, and so many different devices and are using it in so many different ways, makes it even more important that we stick to standards. If we look at a little bit of history with recent web design, recent as in the last 10 years, there were 2 theories. One was that you have a single website that's responsive to different screen sizes and speeds. This was called responsive web design, a single website. That would mean, and the other one was the theory that you should have like probably at least 2 websites, one built for big desktops and laptops with fast connections, lots of big images and so on, and then a separate one built specifically for small screens with slower connections, which was usually mobile stuff. Those were called dedicated mobile sites. For more detail about this a little bit and how these things could interact, this link will show you some interesting ideas of responsive web design and what it means, and it also compares it to adaptive web design. The idea is that both will change as the screen size changes, but the key thing is the flow in responsive web designs. When the screen gets smaller, things flow down and don't overlap like a static website that doesn't respond to changes in size. We can do this with relative units. If we base things on percentages, as we'll see ourselves, then they get smaller altogether, as opposed to basing them in hard units like pixels. We also, we also have breakpoints. So in more complex designs, things get smaller, but then they also move around also. They don't just get smaller and get longer. They get smaller and then things shift and change. Maybe photos go away. We can use min and max values. And this gets more complicated now as moving nested objects and so on. Feel free to look through this yourself. One of the key questions always was, especially with responsive web design where you have a single website, is do you start first with a desktop, a big site that you build, and then you make it work for mobile? You make it smaller? Or do you do it the other way around? You start with the mobile site first, the small site, and make it bigger. This argument, this whole discussion, does not take into account apps, which are specifically written for mobile, but are kind of a different technology than HTML and CSS, somewhat different, a little bit different than those. And then we'll get into web fonts and system fonts and bitmaps, images and vector images. We'll be discussing those. You'll be reading about those also. And then there's also a difference between responsive and adaptive design is another page you'll find if you want to go explore it on your own with this link. And this presentation, remember, like all the presentations I do, will be available on Moodle in the presentations folder at the bottom of the week section. So responsive web design, the pros are, the positive side of it is you have a single website. So everybody gets the same stuff. And you know they do because it's all on the single website. And it's a single URL. That's all it is. Boom. You want to go to, Walmart, you just go to walmart.com. And if you have a big screen, a little screen, you get the same thing. But the cons were, is it really quite as good? It wasn't made exactly for that website. If it was made first to be a big desktop, yes, it gets smaller on mobile, but is it as fast as it could be as if it was really made just for mobile, or the other way around? So it could be slower performance for mobile, it could be harder to navigate, it could take more work to customize for each type of device. Oops. Example of of a responsive web design is almost any modern website. But let's just go to Starbucks for that matter. Okay, right, good. So this is a great big desktop machine, and this is what it looks like. But if I make it really tiny and narrow, there it is. Look at it's everything has shifted and gotten smaller and squeezed, and some things have actually gone away, and it's gotten long and stretched out. So that's an example of and in most all modern sites that shift and are responsive. Dedicated mobile design, which these days is more like apps, but as I said, there's still some around. The idea behind it was that it was easier to adjust and adapt for changes. Like mobile design, the number of different browsers and different operating systems changes dramatically and quickly all the time. So if you have just a mobile site, you just need to work on that for that stuff. But your dedicated, your full-size site can be separate and made just perfectly for that, for big devices. Faster to load for mobile, easier to navigate because it's made specifically for it. The cons are you're updating stuff in multiple places now. You have to make sure everybody gets the same stuff, right? And also, you're also relying sometimes on the computer or the device to do the redirection, to sense that, oh, this is a small device, so it needs to have the other website, and then it redirects it for you. That can be slow. Different content and function. It's hard to update. You have multiple websites. That's what it comes down to, right? So example, there's actually very few what we call .m or M. sites left anymore. This was what Walmart's used to look like some time ago. Now it's a responsive web design site. It's the same for everybody, for small or big screens. This was a .m site. They were really like extreme mobile sites. They were like the original apps, really. So why don't we have .m sites and these dedicated small sites now? Well, one reason is they've almost all gone away is that Google doesn't like them. It likes the single website that it can be searchable. So they became less important in Google rankings, and then people moved away from them. M. sites, dedicated mobile sites, has moved to apps. App rating uses different technology that we use here. You want to learn more about dedicated M. sites and how they worked and converting them and so on. These are a couple of good links you could look at. Static sites. Okay, so we're talking about, at this point, we've been talking about either you have one website and adjust different screen sizes, or you have one that adjusts somewhat to maybe desktop and laptop, but then we have one that's small, that just is for phones and very small devices. And then who knows about tablets or in between. Well, the truth is, there actually are sites that don't embrace either of those ideas. In the original web, everything was static. We called it static. In this case, we mean static as in it doesn't adjust to different widths. Right? It just was. If you write the most simple HTML and CSS, then what you're going to get is a static site. And the sites that you will begin building are static sites. And there's nothing wrong with learning with static sites. In fact, many prototypes are made with static sites, but then we have to make them responsive for different screen sizes later. There aren't that many. I mean, you can definitely find static sites on the web, but here's an example of one right here. It looks fine, a bit goofy and old-fashioned at this stage, right? But what happens if I make it narrower? Well, look at it. It doesn't fit on the screen anymore. I have the dreaded horizontal scroll bar. That's how you can tell that a site is not responsive to different screen sizes at all, because it turns into a site that you have to scroll around this way, which is what we are always trying to avoid. So that's what we mean by static sites in this explanation. Let's continue along. Okay, so accessibility in browsers. This is another big idea. Accessibility in general is, right? And this brings up the idea of progressive enhancement, how we deal with browsers of unknown capabilities. So there's a lot of different browsers out there. And also, there's a lot of different obsolete browsers out there. People who don't update their browsers too, even if they're asked to. Or maybe they're working on old computers that can't have updated browsers. So if you are trying to make a website which is available to a very large number of people with all different operating systems, all different browsers, some of them old computers and old browsers too, what should you do? Well, progressive enhancement, the idea is to keep your site as accessible as possible. We start with the most basic baseline site that will work in even old browsers, and then we add styles and scripts and advanced features but we add them in such a way that older browsers don't need them. In other words, everybody can see what they need to see, and the people who have newer, better browsers get the newer, better stuff. And then at the end, we have there's actually all the time, there's really advanced features that only some of the newest browsers can handle. Nice to have effects, like animation, for instance. They aren't critical to your brand or user experience. We add those on top at the end. So it's sort of like even the most basic old browser can handle it and get the information through, but the people with the best and newest fancy browsers can get the fancy features. But everyone gets what they need to have. This whole idea of accessibility in many different ways, accessible to different browsers, accessibility and speed, accessibility and people who have different kinds of impairments, like visually impaired people. This whole idea of accessibility is one that continues throughout and is an important concept throughout web design. Accessibility, we want to make our pages accessible to the most number of people, despite different browsers or different abilities too. So that's another reason why we stick to the standards that we test in a variety of browsers. And it's also why we keep our HTML separate from our CSS. And we keep structure separate from presentation, because you can have multiple CSS files that with different types of browsers or different types of different uses, the CSS can shift and change, but what underlines that, the HTML, should be understood by everybody. So that's why we keep those things separate, presentation and structure. So what about visually impaired people? What do they use? Well, they often would use a screen reader. Now, I don't have a true screen reader, but there are extensions to your browser that you can use that are screen readers now. So let me see, I have one here someplace, I thought. Oh yeah, here it is. So this is the Chrome screen reader extension, and I'm not really that familiar with it. There's a lot of shortcut keys and stuff. People who really would use it, or they probably would have an even more professional type of screen reader. People who can't see well or can't see at all still need to be able to use the web. So if I add this I'm going to add the extension to my Chrome, and it's adding it. It'll take just a moment, and now it is active.
Feedback is ready.
And it's talking to me. I'm going to change my website.
Woman Gina Gabriella Agnano.
Okay.
Heading 1.
And then I'll go to the next
Writer,
line.
Editor and reporter. Heading 2. Having been born in Costa Rica and moving to America at a young age, travel has always been worldview, and I have been introduced to countless fascinating cultures. Remove from Chrome.
And I'm removing it now. So that screen readers rely on really purely structured HTML separate from CSS in order to be able to properly read through it, as you just saw that one did. So that's another reason that we keep the standards strictly and follow the standards. What else can I say? Oh yeah, more on accessibility. A good place. There's lots of other things that just beyond having good HTML, like things like this contrast in background to foreground and what fonts you use and the sizes of them can make your page more or less accessible to people, particularly who have vision problems. And you can learn about these standards at the World Wide Web Consortium, which is JOU317Web, which is kind of like the committee that doesn't run the internet so much as it runs HTML and CSS, and like all the new changes in HTML and CSS come through this group, the W3C, which is a cooperative group, like a committee, and that's what the web is all about, is cooperative groups like committees. And they eventually will approve new HTML and CSS all the time. These days it's mostly CSS. Lots of changes in CSS, or additions is more like it. And they also have a page about a demo of before and after, a news page, a tickets page, and so on, before and after, when it becomes more accessible. So you look at the home page before, and you see the accessibility problems that they mentioned about the fonts that are hard to read, the colors that are hard to read, the images that don't have alt text. It's one of the key things we do is we add alt text to images because, of course, if you can't see the image, you need to know what's in it still. So we need some text related to it, and so on. And then you can, that's inaccessible, and then you can look at the accessible version and change it. Actually, that's the inaccessible one, accessible one, and so on. So they have this demo of before and after, and you can look at the code and see what things were changed. So there's a lot to accessibility. And in fact, depending on the type of organization you work for, like here at the college, if you're doing a website that was officially for the college or for some other government organization, there are laws that would require you to have certain levels of accessibility. And you can actually run your different websites through an auditing programs that will go through and see what's wrong with them as far as accessibility. While we're talking about the W3, we should talk about the W3 schools, which I mentioned early on, but it's, again, a great place to go and learn basic stuff, all kinds of information. Learn HTML, CSS, and lots of the program too. And it's all free. It's not like the most advanced and intricate training, but it really gets you started. And if you're having trouble with any concepts in HTML, for instance, which there's many concepts within HTML, on and on and on, think about jumping in here and giving it a try. The W3 schools is reliable. They're not going to give you bad advice. Okay, so accessibility is one thing we're always concerned with, and the other one is speed. With mobile, site performance is more important than ever. In your textbook, you can read about a Google study that showed that only like changes of fractions of a second in download speed change user behavior. People just didn't stick around for it. So to keep our pages fast, we have to optimize the images, make them as small as possible. We have to be cautious with scripts. We don't want to load unnecessary assets. Don't load stuff we don't really need. Reduce the number of browser requests to the server. Remember, every additional thing beyond just the basic HTML that you use causes another trip to the server, another trip to the server, another trip to the server. So we decrease that as much as possible. We also think about another big topic beyond accessibility and speed is search engine optimization, SEO. That's what that stands for. It means trying to get your page higher in the list of search results, which of course just means Google, really. SEO isn't a big consideration for your resume site probably, because you would send people to it if they were thinking of hiring you, maybe. But imagine if you're building a website for an online magazine or or business or something, having good search engine results would be really important. You could do, and people do, entire classes on SEO. And we're going to do it very briefly here, just a little bit. But these concepts are important ones to keep in mind. To optimize your site, first you need to figure out what keywords are likely to bring users to your site. Keywords is what it's all about. In fact, when people really start building websites, we're going to just organically learn little bits and bits and bits and build and build and build. But they would actually start by making huge lists of keywords, imagining every word that someone would use to search for what they're planning to do. They would use those keywords both to try to get a domain name that made sense with it, and also then in headings and paragraphs and so on. They'd use those keywords repeatedly, use those keywords to try to improve their search results. So on-page SEO techniques, the URL. Your URL, the stuff that goes into your URL should involve keywords. So the domain name, the something.com, is extremely important, and people would spend a lot of time and money researching and finding just the right domain name. But then so on the folders that you use. So this example, New Bluegrass, which might be a publication of some kind about bluegrass music, makes some sense, but New Blue probably doesn't make as much sense. Having folders like artists or musical related folder names makes sense, and having a file which actually has the name of a performer makes sense, or a band makes sense. So everything within the URL makes sense, but having just some strange random bunch of letters .html, as some sites do, does not make sense and doesn't help your SEO. So using keywords in the URL is very important to SEO results. Likewise, the title. the title is really important within the head element. That's what appears in search results, but it's also it helps improve your search results, having titles that make sense. And you want to put a lot of words in there that make sense for your brand and so on. We typically see titles separated into two parts, maybe some keywords and then the brand or site name also. So what is this page particularly? A couple of some keywords and then the name of the brand or the site name too, right? And there might be more also. And these things could be inverted. But it's the same idea as saying, like this page is about jobs and employment I had. That would be one thing. And my brand is my name in the case of your resume. Title text with keywords can push your page higher in search engine results. Add title text. And title text is sometimes what search engines display. Usually is, actually. So headings. The next in the ranking, the next most important thing is headings, starting with the H1, having keywords in those headings, having headings that make sense and that search engines would pick up on. Critical information for search engines helps increase your rankings. Heading text is giving higher value than other text on the page. To a lesser degree, this applies to other headings like H2s and H3s should you have those. And even in other block elements, like even the text in your paragraph. If you have the opportunity to use some of your keywords, you do use them there. But again, you can't go so crazy that all your stuff is just keywords. It still has to make sense and have good information for your users. And then the linked text, having linked text that works right. You will sometimes occasionally still see the click here kind of a link. That is stupid. Every time you make a link, it's an opportunity to improve SEO and improve the user experience. We haven't gotten to links yet. It won't be too long though. So we always make this is how links are built, by the way. This is maybe one of the first times you've seen them. We have something called an A href. We open the A and we close the A. And it goes around text, which is the linked text that we click on. So instead of having linked text that just says click here, we have linked text that makes sense. 2013 Bluegrass Festival at Clinton County Fair. It's a link to that thing. And we make sure people know from the text where they're going to go and what it's doing. Search engines give link text special attention. This also applies to internal links like your navigation. Good internal link structure also helps search engines map your site. And I won't go to that link, but you could if you wish. That's probably a link that's not such a good example of a link, actually. And then alt text. You've already written, and we haven't talked about images very much, but you've already put a couple images on some pages, and in the instructions has been alt text. It's alternative text. It's text which is an alternative to seeing the image. It's made for a couple reasons. It's in case the image is not displayed, or if someone chooses not to display images, or if they can't see images. But it's also good for SEO. So you would make sure you have good keywords in your alt text too. So good alt text would be, here's the image, and the alt text explains what the picture is. The Gibson Brothers performed at the 2013 Bluegrass Festival, so on and so forth. That's good alt text. It really replaces the image. Then there's meta tags. You've already seen the meta care set. We're not going to spend much time doing other meta tags, but in that head area, in some websites, you'll see a number of the meta tags, like meta name description, meta content. And these could be extreme as far as the keywords people use. There's a maximum number of characters you're allowed to use. People in the old days really use these metas to try to improve their SEO results. The truth is Google doesn't pay as much attention to them anymore, so they're perhaps less important. And also there was so much abuse of them. People were throwing all kinds of things in the meta tags which didn't belong, just to try to improve their results. But as you see, the meta stuff is worth doing, but it doesn't improve your results that much. And then finally, final note about SEO. One of the best things to improve your SEO is something you don't have complete control over. It's people who link to your page. If you have trusted, reliable sites that linked to you, then your search engine results are going to improve. So how do you get people to link to you? Well, you network with other websites on related topics. You offer to exchange links, and you make really good content so people link to you. The more people link to you, the better your SEO is going to be. So there's my roundup of some important big concepts as we continue with this course.